Hello everyone, it is Wednesday the 27th of January. Welcome to our very first, but it's not breakfast anymore, I'm told it's afternoon tea, but it's our afternoon tea breakfast in best practice series. Today we're going to be talking about mentoring, where do I start? And I'm delighted to be joined by some amazing panelists and a very wonderful host. I know that you're going to have an absolutely amazing session. If you don't know me, my name's Chloe Davies. I'm head of training and engagement for My G Work, the online business community for LGBT students, graduates, business professionals, and all those who believe in true workplace equality. It's been, just like everyone, I would imagine, a very intense but a very unifying 2021. And this has been very much the case at My G Work. We've seen some real change, but we've also seen some real growth. And so we're delighted that we're growing as an organisation, but also in one of our bread and butter, one of the things that we do incredibly well when we look at mentoring, this is something that we've been really encouraging on the platform. So not only can you find mentors or mentees, we have an app, so please do make sure that you download that either on Android or on iPhone, and you can really match each other. You can determine how long you want to go on the mentoring journey together with someone, so please do make sure that you check all of that out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to you today because there's so much to fill and we've got such wonderful panelists, and it's a duo. It's myself and my lovely colleague Zoe, who will be doing the Q&A a little bit later on with you. But for now, I'm delighted to hand you over to our host, Jeff Parsons, Managing Director of Macquarie Group Limited. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Chloe. Really appreciate that. And I'm going to follow your example and try to do as little talking as possible today because we've four very, very good panelists I'm really excited to hear from. So I'm going to be in the background doing popping up questions, which will be directed to them. And hopefully that will spark some questions from the people watching, which we can address towards the end. So we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A from the audience, I think, but we've got a whole bunch of provoking questions in the meantime. 10 seconds about me. I've already been introduced by way of name. I'm Jeff Parsons, work at Macquarie, where I'm a managing director in the commodities and global markets team. I'm also the co-chair, chair and co-chair for the last 7 years of the Pride Network, which is the LGBTQ plus network there. We're very proud of everything that we've been achieving, and we've worked a lot with My G Work during that time, and I'm very honoured to have this opportunity to do this mentoring panel with these esteemed guests. So enough about me. Let me try and do a quick whip round in the order on my screen, so no other rhyme or reason, to get the panelists to introduce themselves. Andy, can I start with you?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Dent. I've got quite a long job title. I'm Global Head of Corporate Responsibility and Inclusion at Clyde & Co, a global law firm. I've worked in the legal sector for the last 11 years, and prior to that, in diversity roles in the investment banking sector. And during that time, I've also chaired various LGBTQ plus networks and been involved in many sort of external forums. One of the reasons why I keep doing my job is, as we've seen over the last 12 months, diversity is an evolving topic. It gets slightly more complicated, I think, every year, but that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think, today I'm just here to sort of share my experiences of mentoring and reverse mentoring. Thanks.
And we look forward to hearing them. Laura.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Laura McLean. I am a project manager at Santander, but I aspire to do more than that. I aspire to leave a legacy of strong-willed and resilient individuals who hold the same belief I do in delivering results through empowering people to work at their best. Started in my journey at Santander about 6 years ago. About 4 or 5 years into that, had through some personal challenges, which I'm sure we'll come on to in the questions, which started my journey into the diversity and inclusion space. So I'm also a mindset and behavioural change coach with a lot of experience in supporting and mentoring in the D&I space. Thank
you, Laura. Serafina?
Hi, good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Serafino Capoferri, and I am a commodity analyst within the Commodities and Global Markets Department of Macquarie, so effectively the trading arm, and I am involved with Pride as well, so I work closely with Jeff on various diversity and inclusion initiatives within the bank.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Azib.
Hi everyone, I'm Tizzy Fatima Bakari. I'm a future trainee solicitor at Clifford Chance. I've been mentored myself. Now I believe, mentoring is a gift that we should pass on. So I'm really excited to be on this panel, share experiences of me being a mentee and now mentoring. I'm a co-founder of the Queer Netball and Rounders Initiative, and I'm currently in the midst of launching an intersectional platform for women of colour and professionals in the legal industry.
That's super interesting. Thank you. There's some interesting backgrounds here, and I encourage everyone to bring those backgrounds and context to your answers, because the more diversity you have of answer and perspective in the panel, it's going to be so much better for people and who are listening as well. Get all of that rounded knowledge. Laura, I'm going to start with you if I can. You kind of already mentioned in your introduction that mentoring is a quite personal, powerful experience for you. Do you want to share us a little bit more about why that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think mentoring started as early for me as my first job, working at McDonald's when I was at university. And it wasn't always apparent to me that I was being mentored. It was more that I had those people in my life that asked me the poignant questions that led me to make the right decisions that I needed to make. And it became apparent to me in 2019 when unfortunately I had a breakdown. There was personal trauma, there was good old-fashioned burnout from overworking, and there was also me questioning my sexuality. And at that point, I reflected on my life, and I reflected on the people that I'd looked to for guidance, for advice, and I thought about the impacts that they had on me, the difference that they made. And if I can give you an example, at the point where it was the day I was going to go on my first date with a woman, and I was absolutely petrified, and my boss could see it in my face. And he sat me down and I burst into tears, and I couldn't get the word bisexual out, I couldn't get the word gay out. And he took my hand and he looked at me and he told me there was a label that was much more important than any of those, and it was happy. And in that moment, that was exactly what I needed to hear. Now, he had no experience of LGBT, anything like that. He just knew me. He knew what I needed to hear in that moment. And that really started cementing my acceptance of myself, to hear that from another person that I respected and I looked up to. So went through the breakdown, had therapy, worked through it, accepted my sexuality, got involved in all the pride networks, and just decided that I wanted to give that back to other people. I thought, is there anyone out there that doesn't believe in themselves and doesn't have that person in their ear cheering them on, telling them that it's because of who they are they can achieve anything they want? So reflecting back on the difference that those people made to me, I want to be that person for other people. I think it was Tazib that described it as the gift of mentoring, and that really is what it is. It's a gift, it's a relationship that both people get something out of.
That's thank you for sharing that. It's obviously a very personal story, and that's a great point. I mean, whether we like it or not, we've all been mentored in our lives, right? We may not have identified it as a mentoring relationship as such, but nobody goes through life without getting counsel, a bit of advice, a bit of guidance, and really, it's just pay it forward, right? So, yeah. Andy, let me come to you, because it's an appropriate segue into how you got into mentoring. When and where you did that, first of all, what impact that's had?
Yeah, I mean, I think very sort of quickly, just to give it some context, I'll explain how I came to be in a diversity role in the first place. Many years ago, I was doing some temping work as a male PA, a male-dominated department in an investment bank. All the other PAs were female. The classic kind of a label, square peg, round hole. Couldn't have applied more. And it was a bewildering and interesting experience. And I won't go into details now, but it really awoke my interest in D&I. And actually, many people assume that my going into a D&I role actually because I'm gay, but actually it was because of my experiences of being this sort of square peg in a round hole and didn't really feel I fit in, and I wanted to try and give something back. And I think for a number of years in different roles, I think did my job pretty well. I was very enthusiastic, but it was some fairly brutal feedback from my line manager back in 2012, who said to me that I was a poor role model for the LGBT plus community. And I think when you're someone who is LGBT and someone who isn't tells you you're a poor role model, I was kind of slightly incensed by that, if I'm honest. But I went away, reflected on the feedback, and actually realised she had a point. And I think her point was that I'd got sort of, I could use my own background, my own experiences to help others a lot more than I did. And I think partly, the reason I hadn't done that was because, would someone be interested in hearing my experiences and or what could I offer them? But also her point to me was you've got a lot to, you could learn a lot from others. So I asked one of the trainees at one of my previous firms if we could do some informal reverse mentoring, and I asked another trainee if we could do some just standard mentoring, and that's really how I sort of got into it, and kind of my interest and kind of my, if you like, journey in the world of mentoring has evolved from there. And I think that what it's taught me more than anything is that actually, you can always help other people, and I can, even in my job, and I think there's a kind of misconception that everybody expects D&I professionals to be world experts on every topic. The reality is we never can be. But actually, I've got a lot to learn. I've got a lot to learn from other people. And the single most important thing I would do in a normal year would be to go to law fairs or moderate D&I panel discussions at universities and actually hear from the younger generation and some of the issues and perspectives they see, and how I can help translate that, when they start sort of out in the workplace.
That's amazing. And it's good to hear that you're able to turn that feedback into something, which you were able to take into a positive, actually take some positive action from it. I think we all have to try to do that, right? It's always hard to hear what we think is criticism, but learn from it and take it forward. You mentioned also reverse mentoring, which is a nice way for me to cheat into the next question, which is to you, Serafino. Full disclosure for anyone who didn't pick up in the introduction, Serafino and I both work at Macquarie, and we're both involved in the Pride Network there, so he's a good friend of mine. So this is going to be possibly a little bit weird for me, but try to be as dispassionate as possible. Serafino, okay, so Macquarie has a slightly different angle on mentoring some of the time, and you've been involved in that. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, Macquarie has what is called like a reverse mentoring program, which is, I think Andy touched upon. But basically, it's a program where people, often like young people, LGBT people within the bank, meet with someone who's really senior and basically tell them about LGBT issues. So the aim is to try to educate people that are managing, that quite high profile, but people within the bank about issues that an average LGBT person would face. And it was a very interesting experience for me. First off, because it's a great opportunity to get, to really speak to some people that otherwise you wouldn't get to. But I found it actually, very, very interesting. It was quite funny actually at times as well. You would think that the first, you have the first meeting, and usually the first conversations are all about, the usual issues, which are not obviously quite important issues, but, things like being out of work, what are the key struggles. But then in my case, the conversation really twisted, and I really it was quite amazing to see how interested they were about some of the issues affecting our community. And I was very open. I had a very open approach. So I talked about some stuff that perhaps you wouldn't want to discuss with someone very senior within your employer. But I, went and talked about like mental health issues. It's quite interesting to talk to this, white middle class Caucasian guy about things like PrEP. He had no idea that PrEP existed, for example, which is quite amazing. We, went on and discussed about things like, sexual health, chill out parties, things that perhaps you would think, they're not relevant to the workplace, but actually they are, because the big issues within the community, they do affect the mental health of people, and eventually will have an impact on productivity at work as well. And it was quite amazing to see how interested they were. I remember mentioning the concept of chill out parties to this very senior banker within Macquarie, and then receiving an email afterwards, because I suggested to go and watch like a BBC documentary about it. And he followed up saying, "Well, can you send me the link about it?" Because we're very interested to kind of educate them about some of the issues within the community. Another big topic I remember was also racism within the LGBT community. It was obviously everything was going on with Black Lives Matters, and I talked about how for example, you come across a lot of racism on dating apps. And again, very interesting conversation from that point of view. That's something you wouldn't expect, perhaps, within like a reverse mentoring program in the working place. But I found it, quite interesting.
Well, then hopefully it's a win-win, right? As you said, you've basically infused that person with a lot of knowledge which they can cascade down. And one of the benefits from someone like you is exposure, as you said, to someone who you ordinarily wouldn't necessarily be able to bump into in your day-to-day work. So probably doesn't do your career any harm either to get that sort of exposure, which is great. Tazib, I think your career has been quite impacted by mentoring, I understand. So tell us a bit about that, please.
Oh, where to begin? So basically, I'm very early into my career, but if it wasn't for mentoring, I don't think I'd be where I am today. I come from a working class background, kind of didn't really have any sort of opportunities. When I was younger, I was homeless, and I thought to myself, okay, where do I go from here? Where do I get these opportunities from? If I want to be in an industry like law, like medicine, who do I look up to? Who do I talk to? Because one thing we don't really speak about is how mentoring should be something that's accessible, should help social mobility. So really, when I first got into law, it was through Sutton Trust Pathways to Law program. I got into there, I kind of started to network, kind of saw an insight of what a legal career could look like for me, but not only as a legal professional, but someone who's LGBT myself, a queer Shia Muslim woman. There's no one out there visible. And when I was going through struggles of sexuality, who could I have turned to? I had no one, absolutely no one. If it wasn't for events from Clifford Chance and stuff, such as the Accepts conference, I wouldn't have found a network of people who were like me, and I wouldn't have become an individual where I can become a mentor myself and be a mentor for people who are like me and who are going through things that I went through. So really mentoring has had a massive, powerful impact on my career. Like I said earlier, I believe it's a gift we should pass on. Not only that, but I think we really have a duty to, especially as people of colour, especially as people belonging to the LGBT community. We need to bring the rest of our community up with us.
That's a really well put point. I mentioned earlier about paying it forward. I mean, as I said, we've all been through this, and you said there's almost like a dutiful obligation to keep that chain of value going. It doesn't stop with us, right? So that's a really well made point, Azib. Thank you, Laura. Let me come back to you, and I want to get a bit more specific now, because I understand you're working on an exciting initiative at Santander. I think in the context of women in finance. Is that correct? Tell us a bit about that.
That is correct, Jeff. Yes. So I am actively involved in the Women in Business Network at Santander. And we're working on a new mentoring scheme for our members. Essentially last year when COVID hit, our chair set us the problem statement of how do we help our members really recognise how amazing they've been during COVID-19, the new skills they've developed, and get their focus back on personal development and continuous improvement. So myself and a few other colleagues came up with this workshop, this Embracing Your New Normal workshop. And it was simple as we created a safe space for members to connect and talk about their experiences and problems and share solutions, bring in those broader perspectives to sort of increase their choice of behaviour. And it was one of the most successful workshops we've ran in Women in Business. So off the back of that, we really saw that there was a need to connect across the network as well as from the top down. So myself and another lady are going to be collaborating on a mentoring scheme. We want to make it something a little bit more different to the traditional mentoring, so that we can cater for the current challenges and moving into the digital age. But I don't want to give away too much. All I will say is watch this space. But I hope to bring my skills as a mixed race, bisexual, adopted Scottish woman living in England, and my experiences from the mentoring scheme that I actively support as part of Involve. And my other colleague is actively working with external companies as well as part of the 30% Club. So we hope by bringing in those different perspectives and our experiences that we can create something amazing for our members. So it's coming this year. Watch this space. And if anyone's got any ideas or feedback on mentoring that they're passionate about, that they think should be brought up to speed to make this modern mentoring scheme something that really works for its members, please reach out to me. I want to hear your ideas.
You've got us all on tenterhooks now, Laura. Can't wait to see what this is all about. It's all very tempting.
No pressure.
No, exactly. No, but it sounds super interesting, and I love to see that people building on these concepts and saying, let's try to find a new angle and keep us all engaged. We've had a very timely question coming from Emily Abam. Sorry, I'm probably butchering your name, Emily, but you've asked a question which is, if you're basically setting up a reverse mentoring program, I need sort of do's and don'ts, top tips. What's the key ingredients? Safe space was just mentioned by Laura, which I think is a very important thing, and that the ability to talk, which I think is an area that Serafina was keen on. Andy, let me come to you. What would you say the key ingredients are in a successful a successful mentoring program?
I think I would just sort of start by sort of picking up on what Tazib and Laura said. I think we all got a responsibility to help the next generation, and I freely admit that it took me a long time to realise that. I think to have a successful mentoring program, and you probably would get different answers depending on who you ask this question to. I think you've got to be prepared that it may not tell you what you want to hear. I think the whole point of a mentoring program or reverse mentoring program is to understand different perspectives and how people see the world and organization and the challenges they face. And I think for it to be successful, it has got to be led, and it sounds a cliche, it's got to be led from the top. It's got to feel authentic, and you've got to accept that one of the outcomes hopefully is cultural change, because if you don't, I think you're starting on the back foot already. And I think the other point is a successful mentoring program is also engaging as many of the people who you would be perhaps least likely to volunteer for a mentoring program as possible, because it is about opening the eyes to people, at different levels, different backgrounds. And I think this kind of, for those of you who know me, I always try and look at diversity in its broadest context. And I think that, I've said this many times at different talks, everyone is diverse, but people don't necessarily see themselves as diverse. But I think the other point is that you for it to work, you've got to let people understand that it is an acceptable part of the organization and the fabric of the organization. Because if it just feels like a kind of tick box exercise, for the sake of it, then it's never going to work. It's got to be led. It has to be seen as well as a kind of firm-wide initiative, not something that HR do.
Yes, maybe I can chip in there as well.
And you just mentioned there that it's probably critical to get people. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just saying that, building on what Andy was saying, I think authenticity and structure are also very important, because you'll be talking to, especially if you're doing, if you're mentoring someone who's really senior in the bank, very often that person is very busy and will feel like, oh God, this is another tick box exercise that I need to do. So you've got to bring really your, authentic self, and just really make sure that you explain why this is important. Otherwise, the other person, they're very busy. They are in their day to day. I personally had the impression sometimes they felt like, this is going to be not a waste of time, but it's going to be, another thing that I need to do. Whereas if you bring your authentic self, we really emphasize why these things matter to them as well. You're more likely to, it's more likely to be successful in my view.
And that I was going to ask, and thanks, Serafina, I was going to ask Andy to you, and I think Serafina may have partly answered my question already, which was, you mentioned, Andy, that it's critical to get perhaps the least obvious candidates involved, because quite often you've got the usual suspects who are very into this, who sign up immediately, and it's all, singing to the choir, if you like, but you've got the bigger challenge. Do you have any tips about how to engage those slightly trickier people to get involved?
I don't think it's an award-winning formula, but I think from my perspective, it is highlighting to people the sort of the very real sort of concerns and issues that people face about their careers, their personal backgrounds, because I think it is very easy for, I put myself in the slightly older age category, to forget what it's like to be kind of developing your career. And I think it is about it's sort of encourage. It's about asking them. Sometimes it's as simple as asking them outright if they will take part. But I think also sometimes, and I find this a lot over the years, people want to get involved who perhaps don't seem like an obvious fit for a diversity initiative, but they often feel that they aren't able to get involved. And I think sometimes they actually just like to be asked. So I think it's probably a combination of asking them directly, but I think also just putting it out there. We recently launched our reverse mentoring program at Clyde & Co. And one of the things that really surprised me was the sheer number of senior people that signed up without any persuasion at all. I think the last year has probably highlighted the fact that, understanding people's perspectives and how important this stuff is, particularly someone from an LGBTQ plus background. It's important to their careers in the workplace, and also at the end of the day, this is all about keeping the best talent. And people these days have far more choice than ever before. So I think that's what I would say.
And it's a very good point you made. It's probably really been more important than now, when everybody is actually thinking about the extra stresses of having to work remotely and etc. And having an outlet for that, and being able to be mentored through what may be some challenging issues which you would normally be really coming up in a normal office environment. It's valuable, right? Jazia, coming to you, because we're getting into the nitty gritty now of how to do mentoring, if you like. I understand at Clifford Chance it's done in several different ways, which is, leaves me with an obvious question of, can you tell us about some of them, and how you bring all of them together?
Yeah, of course. So I think in 2018, Clifford Chance launched its reverse mentoring scheme. I also think through the networks as well, I think the lunch and learns that Clifford Chance regularly do, especially an example is Kate Smith, a trans man. He gave a lunch and learn as the only trans man in the firm. And loads of people attended that, and lunch and learns are a great way of mentoring as well. Sort of like a broad mentoring, not really the traditional one-on-one, which is still a great thing. There's a program called Access, which is a 5-day social mobility program, for which I believe to A-level students, part of the Prime program. And through the Access program, and aspects of it is Access mentors. Now, whoever goes through the Access program can also have access to these mentors whenever they like on a virtual platform. Also, from my experience as well, I had mentoring, I still get mentored as a future trainee. They assign someone who is a trainee at the firm to the future trainees, but not only that, when I got my training contract offer, I was even mentored then as well by someone at the firm. So really, Clifford Chance has various different ways where mentoring takes place, somewhat traditional, somewhat not traditional, very much accessible.
That's super interesting. And I made a point at the start. I mean, you don't just have to have a traditional, formal, designated mentoring relationship, right? We'll probably get passive mentoring in our lives as well, just a bit of guidance, whatever. But you can be doing mentoring without somebody putting that hat on you and saying, you are my mentor.
Exactly.
It can be very much a day-to-day business as usual kind of thing, and people can be getting a lot more out of it than you would necessarily realize, as you are passively mentoring them or doing it without realizing that that's the role you're taking. Thank you. It's interesting. And some of those programs sound, between you and Laura, there's things I want to steal. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Serafino, come back to you. I mentioned earlier that perhaps we get a little bit more specific, a bit more personal, if you don't mind, obviously, and you're our friends, so I feel I can ask this. But originally, obviously, you're not from the UK, you're immigrants to the UK. You've mentioned in discussion that, from a personal perspective, you've had some particular motivators to try and help you succeed in this context. If you're okay to share a little bit about that, would you mind?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. I think, in many ways, I guess, I come from a working class background. I came to the UK, I couldn't speak a word of English. I'm sure in many other ways also I've been lucky and privileged. But yeah, for sure, it's been, my profile is quite a bit of a, it's probably an outsider. Like it's not the typical publicly educated British students that apply to work in finance. But I found it that just following on what was you guys were just saying, very often you meet people along the way that you don't formally call them a mentor, but they really become basically someone that for whatever reason they really support you and really guide you. And very often you have different people with different roles, like supporting you in different ways. And I think it's very important because you get, like, to me personally, like what I got from these people was a lot of self-confidence in my own abilities. You know, when you meet someone that, you know, really reinforces you, and, you know, that self-confidence is very important if you want to compete then on, you know, on the labor market. That's something that I got, but also vision. You know, I met people that have helped me to be strategic about my career, you know, helped me to kind of understand what skills I needed, or what parts of the business I should focus on if I wanted to, you know, get from A to B. So it was really a combination of getting, on one side, like support and self-confidence. It helped me to build my self-confidence and also get that kind of vision to get where I wanted to go. But I got that from really, really different people that I met in Strange as well. Like, I remember particular one person that I met on a night out. And back then I was like 22, so I just moved to London, I just graduated, I was looking for a job. And she was like a 41 years old woman who had like an established career in banking for 10 years. But she was originally from New Zealand, and she had a very interesting life pattern because she was pregnant when she was 16. She lived for 14 years in a farm, and then she did she did a degree by post. She did maths, and then she graduated when she was 31, and then started her career all the way from a farm in New Zealand, and became a very important banking within Barclays. And I met her on a night out, and we had this amazing bond straight away, and she has become informally a mentor of mine. I never called her a mentor, but actually it was before I had this call today when I was thinking about who would be my mentor, and she came to my mind, and I realized how much of an important role model she was for me. Even though, like, I never really, I consider her more of a friend rather than a mentor, but effectively she was one. So, I guess, you meet various mentors throughout your life in various different ways, and I think you got different people that support you also in different ways.
It's super interesting. I think the point's coming up many times in many different ways about how mentors come in many different shapes and sizes and forms and formalities or not. So bear in mind when you're next having a conversation with someone who is senior or junior to you. I mean, that's probably some mentoring happening in that conversation without you even realizing it. So let's move on. Thank you, Serafina, for that. That was a bit of a personal question. So thank you for sharing. I do appreciate that. Laura, let me come back to you, and we get a bit more corporate again now because Santander in particular, where you work, you've got a very good reputation in this space. You've already kind of dangled a few carrots for us about the things that are happening, but I understand there's some pretty good, a bit more detail about the actual business's approach to mentoring, which we may be able to get you to, without giving too much away, share with us.
Yeah, no, so I think we have a number of networks within Santander that focus on the different diversity strands. And across those networks, we work with different external companies on mentoring, like business in the community and moving ahead. So the guidelines will change depending on each programme. So, for example, whether they're internal or external. But I think what we try to recognise is that there's no one size fits all. The success of mentoring is down to the relationship between the mentee and the mentor, the amount that they put in. It's a relationship where both people contribute, and it's not about so much the goal, it's about the journey along the way. So we like to try and provide some freedom within that framework to ensure that the mentor schemes and the individuals who sign up to these courses and the amazing colleagues who support them are able to make it work for them.
That's really good. You touched on a very important point there, which is one of the most practical questions we always get, we have to wrestle with is, it's very nice having a program, very nice having lots of materials, but you need mentors and you need mentees, and you need enough of them, and you need to match them, and you need to make that relationship work, right? And that's one of the critical ingredients I think we probably need to understand a little bit more about. Andy, I'm going to come to you. At Clyde & Co, how do you go about that in terms of pairing up, and what impact in particular does the identities of the mentor and mentee have in that decision and that relationship?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I would say that, I think I agree. I think also the thing to remember is one size doesn't fit all. And I think in my previous firms and in Clyde & Co, when we're setting this up, I think it's important to remember that we shouldn't assume that like everybody from one community at a junior level has the same issues and wants to get the same out of the mentoring program as everyone else. I think how we've gone about it is relatively straightforward in that we have asked people to divulge as sort of, if you like, as much personal information about themselves as they feel comfortable with. Now, some people have sort of told us quite a lot. Some people haven't told us as much. We were very clear that if people didn't want to tell us anything about their background, they didn't have to. What we did ask though was what they wanted to get out of it. Are there any particular issues or topics they wanted to explore, and or if there was a particular person, I mean, not necessarily level, because all the sort of mentees are senior, but if there was a particular background of somebody they wanted to sort of talk to, rather than just assume that they might want to talk to someone. And I think similar with the mentee, I think it's again asking them if there was a particular topic they wanted to try and understand more about, or just find out more about people from a particular background or whatever. So I think it's not an exact science, but I think sort of we've used the information to sort of try and match people accordingly. That's a manual process. We haven't sort of used any algorithms or anything like that, because I think that you could do that if it was perhaps a much bigger scheme, but I don't think it necessarily get you the right results. And I think also it is about what we said to the mentees is don't assume anything about the the junior person who's mentoring you. Don't assume anything about that background, because actually you could be completely wrong and make wrong assumptions. I mean, and the trouble is it's a human instinct to assume things about people. I think it's almost unavoidable, but I think you've got to try not to. And I think equally we said to the mentors, be open-minded about the mentees. Don't be put off by the seniority. They want to understand about sort of your issues, your background, etc. And I think it is about trying to sort of just make sure that you wherever you can, you've got the right fit for people. And we've had to tweak it. We haven't got it right, and we've had to look at the names again and maybe actually think, on reflection, perhaps we could sort of pair X and Y together, for example. And I think what we've also said to people is, be honest. If it's not working, you need to tell us, because actually sometimes it doesn't work, and I think it's okay if it doesn't work. I think there's a kind of perhaps misconception that you've got a mentor or a mentee, therefore you're kind of stuck with them forever. And for whatever reason, sometimes it doesn't work. And I think the one thing that we are absolutely clear on, we don't want to compromise anyone's sort of identity or personal background. So if someone is LGBTQ plus who takes part in this either as a mentor or mentee, and they don't want to divulge that, that's absolutely fine. And I think so I think that is really important. And I think the other thing to stress, and it's very hard, but I think there's a confidentiality point here as well. I think my message to anyone would be, it's got to be a confidential conversation unless you genuinely believe the other person, you might be mentoring or you're talking to is at risk. I think otherwise what they tell you has got to be confidential, and you've got to build up that trust as well. That's really important.
Thank you. And there's some really, really good principles there, I'd say. And point you made is that, it's not an exact science, right? It's, things like this can sometimes take a bit of tweaking. You can't say this is the recipe for absolute success. Like anything, and especially if it's got humans involved, we're not machines. There are times when things need to be tweaked a little along the way. So don't give up if it doesn't work perfectly the first time. Just keep going. I think most mentoring programs go through iterations. I think that's the key point to take away from that. I'm going to come to you, Serafino, now with a question I'm going to ask with a degree of trepidation, because I have a feeling I know where we might go with the answer on this. But I'm particularly interested. We work in a region where some of the countries that we cover aren't as, shall we say, mature in their LGBTQ plus awareness / acceptance as we are, luckily, in the UK. But we still have to work with those clients. We still have sometimes to visit those environments. I think you've probably got a particular instance where you were visiting another country and working remotely from there, where you probably needed a bit of guidance, and you went and got some. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I feel I'm the one bringing controversial stories to this panel. But anyway, yeah. So I guess this is an example of how mentoring can help you throughout like difficult situations. This is the case for me, and actually my mentor in this case was Jeff. But anyway, I was so yeah, like I said in my introduction, I'm a commodity analyst. So I do, part of my job is like traveling a lot, and I go to lots of different parts of the planet, and I sometimes I visit mines in places like Africa or Asia or Australia. And I've been to jurisdictions where perhaps there isn't such a strong emphasis on equality as there is in some other parts of the world. And there was a particularly difficult situation that happened to me. So basically, I was at a networking event which was set up just for me to meet some people within this mining company. And I was basically stuck there. I couldn't leave. And you know what it's like, the kind of events, you drink, and when people start drinking, kind of stop being professional, and there's a lot of comments, throwing here and there, but that's kind of standard. I'm used to that. But then at some point in the evening, things kind of took a different twist, and most people started leaving. And interestingly, when the women left, the remaining men completely shifted their behavior and started becoming more and more unprofessional. At some point, one of the remaining men just made the suggestion to go to a strip club, and in certain parts of Asia, this is very often, part of our forming a business relationship. And I really struggled in that situation because obviously I did not want to go. I wanted to leave that networking event. I was already feeling quite uncomfortable, but I felt that tension of I can't really go because this event is about me getting to know them. It would damage, the business that we're trying to do. So it was actually a very difficult situation. And anyway, after that business trip, I felt actually really down about the industry, and I just felt like really didn't want to be in an industry where I was constantly exposed to this kind of situation, because it just really takes a toll on me. When you can't be authentic, when you can't be yourself, it's just I just felt pretty down. So I reached out, including to people within the bank, including Jeff. And I think for me, that situation was just very important to talk to someone who's more senior, who probably has been, perhaps not in the exact situation, but in situations that are very similar to those, and understand how they dealt with it, how to manage it, how to not to be in a similar situation again in the future. And I think it was very important because at that point in time, I was genuinely questioning my career path, wondering whether I should be in this industry or not. So it was just an example of how mentoring helped me throughout difficult situations.
I mean, super powerful. I mean, you pretty much basically said that if it were not for mentoring, you may not be in this industry anymore. I mean, that's a pretty big fork in the road, which you can say mentoring has helped you, reconcile yourself to the industry and find out how to best to manage that going forward. Which it's that powerful a tool, and it's just about talking to people and getting their advice, guidance, and benefit of their experience. So, and I was one of several, I'm sure, and I was very happy to share my experience because, I had been in a very similar situation to that. And I could share with you, how I reacted and what I've done about it since. And, it doesn't, mentoring doesn't always have to come from direct experience. We can draw on a lot of comparables and a lot of general guidance. But if you've got, obviously, relevant experience, that's even stronger, I think, for a mentee to learn from. So, thank you again for sharing that. Sorry, I seem to be asking you personal questions. I do apologise. Shazid, let me come to you with perhaps less personal question. I mean, it's about you because you are a mentor. So let me just say, what are your hopes for mentoring going forward? And you see the value of this as a tool in the future?
First, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry, Serafina, that you went through something like that. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really sort of good example of how mentoring is not just something that's strictly limited to just the professional capacity. You can go to your mentors literally about anything if you feel like you need someone to talk to. But what I'm seeing right now as a mentor myself, so I basically mentor through LinkedIn anyway, but I'm seeing on the platform the increasing commercialization of mentoring, which is kind of an issue for me personally from a social mobility perspective. I don't believe mentoring should be something that should be commercialized, and in the future I'm hoping it remains something that's accessible and something very much old-fashioned, as you could just drop a message and ask them maybe someone who's senior or someone in a position that you'd like to be, if they'd have a chat. I'm kind of increasingly seeing commercialization of mentoring, which I don't think personally, which might be controversial, is something that's conducive to the whole mentoring experience. And I believe mentoring can really make that difference in people's careers, in the fact that because it's something that's so organic, something that's so authentic, and something that's not like a sold experience to someone, that can truly help someone. I know for my personal experience, had it not been for my personal mentoring experiences, I'm pretty sure that, you know, like I said before, I wouldn't be here today. I think in impacting people's careers, I remember there was someone who was visually impaired who reached out to me on Clifford Chance's, after Clifford Chance's Accept conference. He had worries that maybe he wouldn't be able to get a training contract at Clifford Chance because he felt as if he was too old for the specified sort of target audience for the training contract at that time, first year, second year students. And it was really just, you know, sitting down with him, giving him that sort of reassurance. And he spoke to me about his background as an LGBT individual and how visible role models really helped him in pursuing what he wanted to pursue, that, you know, thankfully he was able to get a training contract position. And I think those sort of stories are the ones that are really, really sort of indicative of how mentoring can impact people's careers. Because I'm pretty sure if it was, if you didn't talk to someone who was already visibly out, who was already visibly somewhere where he was wanting to go to, you probably never would have taken that chance or opportunity. So those are my hopes for the future of mentoring. Remains accessible, remains something that's organic and not really commercialized, which is kind of controversial, but it's just my opinion.
Do you want to clarify what you mean by commercialized in that context, Tizzy?
Oh, sorry. So basically, I think we kind of see the rise of, you know, packages. People, I can mentor you for £10. I was selling you this package of how to get your dream position, X, Y, Z, which I don't think is a fair chance for everyone, because, like I said before, social mobility issues, it's not accessible. Those people who don't have that sort of capital to purchase those sort of programs are going to be disadvantaged in the long run. What's that going to have for the impact of that industry or industries alike? That's
a very good point. Okay,
Jeff, I just wonder if I could jump in there. I think you raise a very valid point, Tazib, and I think also picking up on what Serafino said, I think a formal mentoring program would be, I would see it as a failure if it meant that the informal conversations like the ones you've just talked about, actually people didn't feel able to have them, because arguably those are just as important. I just think that sometimes the more bigger ticket programs also are needed to drive organizational change, but this should never be at the expense of the individual ad hoc kind of what examples you both just shared.
I couldn't agree more. And again, it's like the point we've made several times that, you know, mentoring can come, you know, on a very daily basis, right? It doesn't have to be in the guise of a formal program, valuable though that is. So that's really good. Thank you all. We've got a few minutes before we need to open up to audience Q&A, and I wanted to ask all of you a question, if you don't mind. And it really goes to sort of nuts and bolts again of how we would make a program work. Just going to do a quick 1 minute skip around each of you. Laura, let me start with you, since you're the last one not to have spoken. Does your organization actually provide or prepare guidelines for mentors and mentees in the program, or does it leave them to do their own thing?
I'd say, just referring back to what I said earlier, Jeff, we do have guidelines depending on the programme, depending on the diversity strand, depending on the individuals it's designed to support. But if I was to give my sort of key top tip based on my experience, it would be manage expectations. I think going into something and not being clear about what you hope to achieve from it and what you're going to bring from it is a fast track to disappointment. And I think it's an adult to adult relationship. It's a thinking partnership where it's designed to help both of you. So being really clear up front about what you hope to get out of it and what you are and you aren't going to bring to it, it really puts you in the best position to take effective steps towards where you want to be. So, yeah.
Thank you, Laura. And Serafino, how about Macquarie? I know the answer to this, but I want you to say.
Yeah, we do. I think in addition to guidelines, we also prepare like a introduction material, if you want, just some like material talking about some important topics, some say fun facts, but like some important statistics as well about the LGBT world. And I found that to be particularly useful because it gives you something to start the conversation and then to kind of start talking about and start understanding also what your mentee's interest is. So yeah, we went for a fairly structured program where we had a bit of introduction material and then we kind of set up some like guidelines on what to talk about across the various meetings. And yeah, I thought it worked quite well. I'm not sure if Jeff, you want to add more to that, but that was my impression.
No, I completely agree. And I mean, the sort of things that you're referring to, like things like just recommended reading and stuff like that. So an interesting article, which is topical or can give, you know, as you said, the spark of a conversation. So you don't have that awkward, how are we going to start this conversation? Especially in the initial phase, you know, it gives you a running start, which I think is just kind of an icebreaker, if nothing else. It's a nice way to go. Tazib, how about from your perspective?
Pretty much the same. I think it's more so very much similar to what Serafina said. The materials are there about sensitive topics, should you want to read them. And I know Clifford Chance does have material specifically for those hard conversations. And it's not so much, you know, strict guidelines of you need to be this way, you need to be that way. It's more so like Andy said before, it's something that's organic, something that, you know, you just general conversation and stuff like that. So not too much very strict regimented guidelines, but more so here's the materials. This is maybe a difficult topic. Maybe you have questions on. Here's someone you can talk to, or here's an event you can attend at the firm to learn more about it.
That's super interesting. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar. We have guidelines. I mean, whether you call them guidelines or a framework, I think it doesn't matter. I would hate sort of a recurring theme, probably what I've said throughout. I would hate them for being seen as so prescriptive that people feel they've got to follow them to the letter, but they're there to help. And I think perhaps initially for the, you know, that first conversation, which both sides might feel is a bit awkward, depending on like how confident both people are feeling. I think it's you've got to be flexible, but I think also picking up on Laura said, I think it's being honest around what you may not be able to do. So in the past, you know, I can give my, if you like, experiences of being an older LGBT person. I give my experiences this and that. I can't necessarily give my experiences of being a lawyer, even though I've worked in the legal sector for 11 years. And I think it's just about being honest. But it doesn't mean that you can immediately sort of switch off the subject. It just means that perhaps you might have to go away and think about it, or even just try and take, depending on what it is, take soundings from someone else. But I think, yeah, I just think be honest. I think that's the best thing. Probably one single thing I would say.
That's a very good point. Honesty and authenticity was mentioned earlier. It's you know, very much a variation on that theme. You've got to be real to make this work. Yeah. We've got quite a few questions come in. I don't know if Zoe's going to pop up, but I can start fielding some of the questions to you guys while we wait. In no particular order. Hi, Zoe. I'm just going to read the first one that's actually on my screen right now. It's probably because it's the most recent come in. The question, what's the most valuable lesson that you have learned from a mentor and been able to pass on to a mentee, or more generally? I could find that to absolutely anyone, so let me throw it to you, Laura.
I think for me, it's self-acceptance. I alluded to it earlier, it was self-acceptance of my sexuality, but self-acceptance in any way. I think our brains are funny things, and when we start to feel things or experience things that don't quite fit in with the social norms or the blueprints that we're brought up with, depending on our background, it can become a scary place, and you can quite quickly feel alone and like you're not good enough. And my mentors have helped me accept myself, and it was difficult, don't get me wrong, it was tough, it was one of the toughest things I've ever been through, but I've transformed and come out the other side a better, stronger, happier person. And that's what I want to give back to my mentees is that self-acceptance, because once you believe that it's because of who you are that you can achieve anything you set out to achieve, that's when the magic really starts to happen. that's my experience, and I want other people to experience that.
Thank you, Laura. Anybody else would like to chip in? Otherwise, to add to that.
Yeah. So
don't think you have to. I've other questions.
Oh yeah, I'll just keep it short and sweet. Basically, what Laura said as well. Not only that, but I think the most important lesson that I took away from, you know, being mentored and from my mentors myself is, you know, being true to who you are. Very much building on what Laura said. Even though sometimes you feel like the whole world's against you, but there are people on your team rooting for you and batting for you. And even though it seems at times that you are alone, especially with the struggle of sexuality, there are people there you can talk to, and just knowing that you have that team there for you, or someone there, it might be one person, it might be a few people, just knowing that they're there for you to, you know, truly navigate that. Knowing that you're not alone is something that, you know, I took away from that. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I think mentoring was a big thing for me, was to pass that on. So yeah,
it's a powerful message when you receive it, and just as powerful when you pass it on. I think that's really great. Thank you, Tizu. That question was from Harry. I thought I should acknowledge that. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. It's a great question, so it's a shame I can't thank them for sending it in, but this is a practical question, and it comes down to managing potential conflicts of interest. If you have a mentor and a mentee basically in the same line of business within the company, one is more senior than the other, you know, can that create, you know, a conflict between the front office business reporting line and the mentor-mentee relationship? Have you ever had an instance of how that that happening, and if so, how would you recommend managing it? Maybe I'll come to Andy for that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's something you've got to be alive to. I think I would always encourage people to seek, you know, mentees and mentors who aren't necessarily in your business line, but I appreciate that sometimes that is what you want. I think sometimes if there is potentially a conflict, the person who kind of spots the conflict needs to be honest and say that that's what they see, because I think the last thing you want is for the mentoring relationship, whether that's being an informal one or part of a formal program, you don't want it to lose the integrity. You know, I will not name the organization, but one of my previous organizations many years ago had the view was that the mentor should almost sort of seen as a given, the mentor should report back on the conversation having the mentees. And I think I think the conflict point is a really real one, but I think it can be managed. But again, it's just being honest.
Very much. I'm looking at anyone else who would like to add to that. No problem. Okay, we do have another question, which is an interesting one, actually, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer everyone's going to give to this, given the discussion we've just had. This question came in fairly early, and it's quite a long question, but boiling it down is, are there any actual essential qualifications to being a mentor? And do you have any qualifications to be a mentor? Is it like a therapist or something like that? What are the key ingredients that you would need to have to be a mentor? Serafina?
Yeah, tough one. Like, no, I don't think you need to have any qualifications. I certainly don't. I mean, maybe, yeah, there's an element of, you know, there are some skills that perhaps like, you know, are useful if you are a mentor, and certainly like empathy is one of them. And, you know, so you need to be a good communicator. But I don't know, I think at the end of the day, it's a two-way relationship, right? Like the mentor gives, but also receives something. And in my opinion, thinking about it, like it's just a good ingredient in a good like mentor relationship is like if you need to be able to connect to your mentee. And very often I found that the most successful mentors I've had in my experience are those that like saw something in me or in my experience which reminded them, or, you know, or reminded their experience, and that create like a powerful bond. In my experience, that whenever there is that dynamic, for whatever reason, it could be the background, it could be sexuality, it could be, you know, the sectors you work in, it could be your career vision, whatever. When you kind of can connect with your mentor in that sense, that's when you have the most powerful and, you know, also most useful relationship. But no, I don't think you need at all. I don't think you need any formal qualifications.
I think you just touched on an extension to that question I was about to ask, and a comment's just come in on the chat while you were talking, Seraphina, which is, well, but surely a mentor needs to know or have some knowledge or specific attunement to the mentees' industry, job, whatever it is they're mentoring them about. Tazib, do you think that's valid, or should we be seeing mentoring more broadly than just the functional relationship to do with the job, the nature of the job?
I think it's a very good question. I personally don't have specific qualifications for mentoring. I think it kind of builds on the social mobility thing, because if you take, for example, mentoring someone on their sexuality and their journey of being an LGBT individual in the professional workplace, what qualifications can you take that will help you for that? Yes, you got the social skills of, empathy, understanding, but it's more so, I think I see mentoring as something of, you've had that experience of what that specific person is going through at the moment or struggling with. Therefore, you kind of, I kind of see it as, if you're climbing a mountain, I'm on top of the mountain at the moment, and maybe someone who's kind of halfway about to get to the summit is kind of like, where the hell do I go from here? Sorry about my language. Where do I go from here? Reaching out, being, oh, well, how much longer do I have to go? What route should I take? How can I get to that tip of that mountain or top of that mountain? And I kind of see mentoring as something that's kind of like that. But I do understand where the person is coming from as well, in terms of if there's anything specialist or, that you are mentoring about. I don't think there's any formal qualification that you need. I think it's something that's broad, because, mentoring is not just something that operates in like a professional sort of capacity. It's personal. Very much like Seraphina said with his earlier story, it was personal to him at that time, but also professional as well.
Thank you very much, Tazib, for that. And welcome back, Laura. We lost you there for a little while. Zoe's popped up. Zoe, are we out of time, or do we have time for one more question, or what's the status?
We are out of time, but why don't we just do one more question and then we'll wrap it up, because I think the conversation is going so well.
We do have a lot more questions, and a lot of people on the chat who've said things. So on behalf of everyone here, I'll apologise if we haven't got to your question or dealt with your comment in the chat, but there's been a lot of them, and I think we'll all agree that it's been a very engaging session. So Zoe, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff, for facilitating such a brilliant conversation. Thank you to our panelists. That's really, truly been such a brilliant session. I feel like I've learned so much from listening. I hope all our attendees have really enjoyed it as well. As Jeff said, unfortunately, we don't have enough time for all of your questions, but if you're watching, what you can do is go to mydowork.com. If you haven't already created a profile, please do, and you can connect with all our panelists here on there. You'll notice that they all have mentor on their profiles, which means they're open to receiving questions and advice. And if you go onto our website on the topic of mentoring, there are a lot of mentors on there willing to help and offer advice. So please do go and do that. You can connect with me as well. We also have another event on tomorrow, which is hosted by Lau on job searching and networking strategy. So if you are at the moment looking for a job, or you just want to kind of improve those job searching skills for the future, make sure you sign up to that. I'll include a link to it in the follow-up for everyone. But yeah, unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. So thank you for everyone for joining us, and a massive, massive thank you again to our panelists and to Jeff for hosting us today.